All right, we're here. Welcome into the inaugural podcast here. We don't even have a title for it. It's so new. We're going to be talking to interesting people throughout the River Valley, people that we've heard about, we've seen, we don't know a whole lot about. And, we want to find out more about their careers, more about their lives, what got them to where they've got in their lives. And our very first guest, we're so happy to have Mr. Johnny Story, River Valley Radio's own Johnny Story. I call him our local celebrity. He's the guy that everybody knows and everybody knows that voice. Johnny, man, I appreciate you being our first guest.
Happy to be able to visit with you here today, and your check's in the mail for all that. Let me tell you what, this is a big deal, and you think about how radio has changed. This is an opportunity to add a little more flavor to it and give people an opportunity, if they can't listen at a specific time, to hear something on demand. And so I salute you and River Valley Now for starting this sort of program.
Now, full disclosure, everybody, he's saying nice things because we like each other. We're our businesses, we're actually content partners, so we share information and we try to help one another and get the news covered the best we can. I know that's your thing. That's what you've been doing for 100 years, covering the news here locally, and it matters to you. You can tell you're passionate about it. So what you hear today is just going to be two guys talking shop, and maybe not me telling as much as you, because you've got a whole bunch of stories and a whole bunch of things that I'm sure I'll be able to learn today. I was hoping that we could get some of the stuff we were just talking about in the lobby, about all the great stories and information that you have on deposit. I want some more of that, Johnny, so just bring the good stuff, all right?
Well, there's a lot to talk about, but the one thing that I always tell people that I learned in the radio business was not how to talk, but how to listen. Probably one of the toughest things, and I've been doing this 43 years, and I struggle with it even today. You have to remember to put your Tom Terrific, and if you're as old as me, you know who that is, your Tom Terrific thinking cap, your listening cap on, because if you'll allow people to tell their story, you'll find out a lot of things. And so I just really appreciate you allowing us to tell you a little bit about what's going on.
Yeah. Well, just give us a little bit of background information, where you're from, where you grew up, just a little bit about yourself.
Born and raised in Russellville. They never ran me off. And so raised on the north side of Russellville. And mom and dad worked for International Shoe Company. And so we were up, my sister and I were up and about early in the morning. They had to go to work about 6:45, 7 o'clock. They had to be there at that time. So we were lucky enough, my mother's parents lived about a block away. So we kind of had full reign of the north side with a bunch of kids. And the north side of Russellville was considerably different at that time. When I started school, I started at Washington School, which these days is where Wendy's is on North Arkansas. So, but anyway, grew up in Russellville. Always had a bug for the radio business. Enjoyed it. Just inched my way into radio over the years.
Well, with the last name like Story, I don't know that you ever had a choice but to tell them. So, you were telling us a little bit in the lobby about how you just used to bug your parents into taking you to Little Rock. Tell us a little bit about how you got into the field in general.
The radio business was always pretty interesting to me. When I was probably about 7 years old, one of my Christmas gifts was a transistor radio. And at that time, you listened to KXRJ. KXRJ was the local radio station. Then about maybe 2 years later, KCAB went on the air. KCAB went on the air, as I remember, in the 63, 64 time frame. KXRJ had been on since February of 1947. So growing up, spent a lot of time listening to radio and local radio, and I was always interested in it. I remember my dad would get off and mother would get off work about 3:34 in the afternoon. And at that time, one of the major radio voices that you heard was Marge Crable, Town Talk of the Air. Now, of course, Bill McKinney was on the radio and did the Party Line program. And at that time, radio, much like it is in some stations still, was very, very local. And so if you can imagine a cooking show, literally with ladies and gentlemen calling up on the air with recipes and mailing recipes in, and really just a little bit of everything. But Marge Crable had Town Talk of the Air, and I would listen to that, and people hear me tell that story now at 5 or 6 or 8 years old. Why would you even be interested in that? But for some reason I was, and I would aggravate my dad. I want to see what Marge Crable looks like. At that time, the studio was down at 2nd and Boulder, and so we went down there one day, and she usually popped out of the studio, headed home about 6:15 in the evening. She had a morning show and a late afternoon show, and so that kind of began my interest in the radio business. And one of my friends that I grew up, Tony Lee at Lee's Trash Service, by the way, give him a free plug here. Yeah. But we grew up together. His older brother was one of the radio personalities, Tenderhearted Dennis Lee, TH as everybody knew him. And so occasionally we would duck in the side door and see TH. And there were many, many other names, a litany of people over the years. That's one thing you can say about radio at that time, was you had to have a lot of folks. And so there were a bunch of folks that really continued to pique my interest in radio, and it kind of went on from there.
Wow. So you get into the radio. You started when?
I really went to get my license in about 1973. At that time, you had to have a third phone radio telegraph license. And you would apply to the FCC, send an application to the FCC, and our FCC office at that time was in New Orleans. So you'd send an application down there, you'd find out when they had a test for that radio telegraph license, third phone as they used to call it. And it's hard to believe that actually it was a certificate, a big certificate. Everybody that worked at the radio station used to have them framed. And so anyway, you find out where you would take this test, and you'd go take the test. I took my test at Metropolitan High School in Little Rock. But you had to get a study guide. So the closest study guide was in Conway. And in those days, talking your parents into, I want to drive to Conway. So my granddad went with me to Conway, to UCA, and we picked up a study guide. And about 2 months later, we were headed to Little Rock to take that test. And took the test, and about 73 passed that. Well, in those days, pardon me, not unlike today, can't get a job without experience, can't get experience without a job.
Yeah.
So I bugged every radio station from Clarksville to Russellville to Dardanelle to Morrilton at that time, had some contacts, some family friends that worked and had been associated with those. My uncle, his name was Lehman Story, helped to build the tower, the old tower that put KVOM on the air in 1952. So anyway, bugged them for a long, long time, and just couldn't get in. So finally, Kermit Womack was the manager at CARB at that time, and I would go down there and, aggravate people and watch and soak up, try to be a sponge, soak up the information, that what they were doing and how they were doing it. And he advertised for needing somebody to do some radio work. So I went down and interviewed with Kermit Womack and said, Mr. Womack, I'll do anything to get in the radio business. I'll sweep floors, I'll clean toilets, I'll carry the trash out. And he said, well, would you go to church? And I said, well, I guess so. If you need me to, I'll be happy to. You got a job. So my job for about 3.5 years I did it, was to go to a different church every Sunday and record their church service. And the key to this, I'd go in on a Thursday, and we had a big bulletin board back in the back, and everybody had their assignments Monday through Sunday up on this bulletin board. I'd pick up a 3x5 card off, and it would tell me the church and the contact there. Then on Sunday morning, I would fly to churches between Paris and Perryville. Not bad if you're going to Russellville and Dardanelle, Dover, Hector, but making it back, because I had to be back by 1 o'clock, and that program was on at 1. So you can imagine we have, the Arkansas River Valley is extremely friendly. And so when the church service is over with, sometimes at 12, sometimes at 12:15, they certainly want to visit with the guy from the radio station that came by. So I'm like going, I'm going to have to do 90 to get back to Russellville, which I did many times. Unfortunately, thank goodness the statute of limitations is out on that. But we would bring the program back, and I did that Sunday in the Carbland, it was called. And my first Sunday, I went to First Baptist Russellville. Second Sunday, First Assembly of God in London. Third Sunday, the Jehovah's Witness Church. Fourth Sunday, the Catholic Church. I can remember those churches even today, but while they definitely had different takes on religion, they were all very friendly and welcoming and had a common goal, and that was to help people, to encourage people, to welcome people. And that's kind of the reason I think they did the program also, to give people the knowledge that while we all may have different takes on religion, we all have something in common. So it was never dull.
So you went from starting out, with going to the churches,
right,
getting your start into that. One thing I wanted to make sure and point out here, you just said you had to take a test. And now, as anybody with a phone can be in the media, and anybody can, but you've got the credentials here to say, I've actually had to do some things to earn my way to where I am. So it's interesting to learn about your past as far as your background in that. So you go from there to, how did you transition from basically doing that, right, doing the ground floor, get in and cover the churches, to what you're doing now?
About 2 weeks in, I had brought a cassette tape back to the studio, and there was a guy that had to do the afternoon show. And as we all were young in those days, and when you're young, of course, you got a whole lot of energy, and people burn off that energy by going out and running around and doing things they shouldn't be doing. And he kind of had a headache, let's put it that way, and wasn't feeling good. And so he had been upset about something that happened. So I brought the tape in to give to the individual, and the guy says, you know what? This does this, this does this, this does this, and he shook my hand and walked out the door.
Oh, wow.
And so I had watched enough over the time that I'd been there and time that I'd ducked in the side door to visit with people. I called the program director, who was Tom Camerling at that time, and told him what was going on. And so I ran the program and spun a few records in the afternoon, and we just kind of got started from there.
Wow. I wanted to know, because, I'm sure you've got stories on top of stories about some of your favorite events and some of the favorite things that you've been a part of covering throughout your career. I know I've seen you for years at the political, the election night coverage and all those different things. What are some of your favorite things that you get to cover on a yearly basis?
We really do a little bit of everything. We do a lot of, as you mentioned, the political elections, but we get a chance to go out and cover meetings. In a week's time, we'll cover the city council meetings, school board meetings of a number of different communities, the quorum court meetings. And, there's a number of reasons to do that. Definitely you do it for the news content. Mm-hmm. It's kind of hard to have news if you don't go out and collect some of that or make the telephone calls. Amazingly enough, though, years and years ago in the radio business, a lot of small market radio stations, you would have the morning man that essentially, and I know when I started in the radio business many years ago, we had, let me think here, 3 morning papers. The Arkansas Gazette, the Arkansas Democrat was there. The Southwest Times Record delivered to Russellville. You had the afternoon paper, which was the Courier Democrat, mm-hmm. A number of weeklies that people, and so when a guy would head into work of a morning, if he didn't have a news department, and most didn't, it was usually, you had the morning man that would come in and would work till noon, do the news, the sports, anything that he could take out of a newspaper. Literally, they would go to a newsstand and pick up 3 newspapers, and they would go in and play records for about an hour as they cut clippings out of the newspaper. It was really that way. But, we, of course, go out and get the news to obtain that information, but a lot of it's just community involvement. I've been very blessed over the years to go to a number of meetings, and you get a chance to see people like we'll go in a month's time, Dardanelle City Council, Russellville City Council, quorum courts in Polk County and Yell County. And when you don't have a chance to go, people miss you. They enjoy knowing that people are interested in what's going on because, to say the least, being a city councilman, being a mayor, being a county judge, being a quorum court member, that's not an easy job. No. You have an opportunity to make a difference, but sometimes you make a difference at a cost. Mm-hmm. You can only please so many people at a certain time. So it's nice. I think a lot of the people enjoy the fact that when newspapers, when radio stations, when electronic media make their way to meetings, that people care. And so that's really what I enjoy going to the meetings. We've been blessed over the years to cover everything from the Mount Nebo chicken fry to, I was at the beginnings of Ozark Memories Day years ago. We used to cover the Johnson County Peach Festival. We used to cover for many, many years. We'd go and cover live the some of the activities, the county fairs in Conway County and all the surrounding counties, Perry County, over into Logan County. Years ago, when we first began at Carve, we were lucky enough to have some what they call MARTI, which essentially is a two-way radio system that we could send broadcast back. In those days, a cell phone was something that Dick Tracy had on his wrist. Yeah. And so we had a MARTI system. Our engineer today at River Valley Radios, the same engineer we had at that time at Carve, Jim Alexander. We worked together over 40 years, and Jim was a magician in putting together ways to get audio from a remote broadcast back. And so we were blessed to be able to go do Frontier Days in Paris and be able to broadcast that back live, to go down and broadcast all sorts of activities in Conway County and Perry County. And so that was kind of fun too, to be able to go out and do these fairs and to know that people sort of expected you to be there. And so when you showed up, in the old days, we had a Ford Pinto, a Ford Pinto hatchback that had the two-way radio in it, sitting in the back seat. And then in about 1980, our engineer, Jim Alexander, came up with an idea that he sold the ownership and built a van with a hydraulic mast that it was as much amazing to the people that we'd go up, raise this hydraulic mast, tune that antenna in, as it was for us to see it work. So it gave us more flexibility. And so getting the chance to take that gear out and visit with people and let them know that we appreciate them as much as, they have told us they appreciate the news, weather, sports, the music. So having that facet of it has been very rewarding over the years.
Well, it's got to be a personality thing to where you enjoy that kind of. I don't enjoy going to the political stuff, because a lot of times we get yelled at for stuff. I do. I don't know. You don't, because you've been doing this a long time. I'm sure everybody loves you. But
you're not alone.
There's some stuff that it's just not quite as fun. So I guess your personality has been such that it's allowed you to I guess be not just better at it, but have more not just credibility, but also some just people give you a little leeway, maybe a little bit with that.
I think it's one of those things that you cultivate that. Nobody, I truthfully believe, and I can't speak for other people in radio, but I can speak for myself. I think you're a little bit introverted in a way to be in the radio business. Now, people think exactly the opposite, that you're very outgoing and that sort of thing. Years ago, we had a lot of first graders, second graders, kindergartners that would come to the studio. It was on a weekly basis. Schools would come from Russellville, from Dardanelle, from Dover, from Pottsville, and would tour the radio station. One of the main questions was, what's it like to be on the radio? And I'd always tell them, go to the bathroom and talk to yourself for 6 hours. And that's really what it was like, because many times, especially my air shift at that time was in the evening hours. I'd get there you had to be there 30 minutes early. I'd get there about 5:30. Usually I'd been there earlier in the day helping out, because I really felt like on-the-job training was my friend. And so the more I got involved, the more I was involved with what was going on there, the better my ability to handle situations that always come up in the radio business, because it's that immediacy that has really been the difference over the years for radio, for television. But radio really more than any other medium, because it gives you an opportunity, if you're lucky enough to be near a payphone in days gone by, or had that two-way radio, to get on the air with some important reports that could save lives, or at least at the same time give people some information that could be very beneficial to them. And so I think that a lot of it is simply the fact that you cultivate that personality. After a number of years, you're around people that you feel comfortable with. Going to an election in Pope County or Yell County or Johnson County, Conway County, and we used to cover all those, going to those elections used to be almost like a party. Mm-hmm. At the Polk County Courthouse many years ago, they had a PA that they would announce the box by box totals. People were there with their steno pads, and they were writing those totals down, and they were doing running totals as the totals came in, the different boxes came in. The Democratic Party had essentially a feed on one floor. The Republican Party back many years ago was not as big or as strong as it is now. It was still valid. They had a little bit of a feed there. And so you might, not unlike going to the Polk County Fair, you might see people at an election that you'd only see 2 or 3 times a year. So that's one of the things that after a while, there's no doubt, there have been many situations over the years that I've gone into and felt very uncomfortable. But once you find that soft spot where you can start to build some relationships, it does make a difference. And I think while I've been exactly where you're talking about for many years, I was not a big public speaker. I felt uncomfortable. It was easy for me to go to the bathroom and talk to myself for 6 hours. But I think you cultivate that over a period of time, and so it comes along in time. I promise you.
Well, good. 8 years in, I'm gonna maybe get there in about another 40. I want to ask some rapid fire questions here in just a little bit, but just for those who aren't necessarily aware, Joni mentioned, I've kind of described it as being an introverted extrovert, or an extroverted introvert. Really is more like it. You've got to have those moments where you give a lot of energy in those types of settings. We noticed it yesterday when we were meeting with Steve Sullivan. You could tell that he was geared down. He wasn't quite, as energetic and hyped up as you see him on the broadcast. And this field takes tons of time and energy and sacrifice. And I wanted to know where you found that energy, where you've come across what it's taken to have the kind of longevity you've had.
I've been blessed to be surrounded by a lot of good people. It's not anything that I did. It's not anything I possessed. It was being surrounded by people that really were good at what they did and were willing to share that. You have to be open to the input that they give you. And once you're open to that, the most important thing is show up. It's just like playing in sports. You can have a great team, and we've heard this many times in every sport known to man. Well, it all depends on which team shows up.
Yeah.
If you show up to work and you do the best job you can do, chances are, in the long run, you're going to be successful. And there's, as I said, surrounded by good people, and over the years, I've just been pretty consistent. I've tried to show up every day and drink a cup of coffee if I could have one free, and go from there.
I love the consistency is a huge deal. The guy who married my wife and I, he was the officiant. He said, you need to do two things, Mark. You need to show up and shut up. And that's what I've been doing for 10 years. Now, of course, you can't do that when you're talking to yourself for 6 hours a day. But wanted to know a couple of other things just real quickly. I know I mentioned some of the favorite things, the events that you like to cover. What are some of the things that every year you really look forward to this one, or you've had an experience with that one that's just incredible? It's your favorite events to cover?
I would say the elections. I do enjoy the elections. That's always interesting.
Just the excitement.
The excitement of it, and the political intrigue, if you can call it that goes on behind the scenes. We're seeing a lot of that right now in the casino issue. Mm-hmm. There is a lot going on that the average Arkansan, the average Arkansas River Valley resident, I won't say Pope County in, because really, if Pope County does receive a casino, and there's pros and cons on that, let there be no doubt. But if Pope County does receive, and I think probably will receive, a casino, it's going to affect residents all throughout this area. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of things going on that people see right now that are easily viewed and easily learned. There's so much more going on behind the scenes, and it's behind the scenes stuff that's really pretty interesting. So I'd say the elections, for years and years and years, I loved going to the county fairs and visiting with people and going over to the Agri barns and interviewing the kids that have animals there, seeing people over. The county fair is still a very viable part of the Arkansas River Valley's past. It was just different, as everything is in the past, and there was a time when it was a huge, huge event, and so always enjoyed doing those. Used to do a ton of fair parades over the years, and so that's one of the things, unique things about radio in a small market, is that you're a utility man. You do a little bit of everything, including plunging the toilet when it needs it.
Yeah, absolutely. I wanted to ask about, there's got to have been over 40 years some things that weren't necessarily supposed to go out, some funny things that may have happened at an event that ends up getting out over the radio. Do you have any funny little, like, oh man, that is not exactly what we were looking for, but there it is. It's out there on the air.
Probably the nicest one. There are a lot of them I can't share.
Yeah, probably some ones not fit for the air, huh?
Probably the nicest one, and it's not even politically correct any longer. We had a guy that came here from California that went to work for us. He, much like me, he had been a collector, as a matter of fact, worked for a collection company for a number of years in Los Angeles, and had always wanted to be in radio. And so he applied all over the nation after he got out of what we used to call a 90-day wonder radio school. And there were a lot of those radio schools that would allow you to get your third phone license and give you the basics of what radio was all about. He applied all over the nation, couldn't get a job. Well, he sent an application to Carve and just happened to hit a nerve with somebody, and so he moved from Los Angeles, California to Russellville, Arkansas, if you can believe that, to get a job in radio. And so he was young, and when you would send somebody out on something like that, you're going to make mistakes. You're going to have you learn from your mistakes. So he was covering and I won't even mention the school. He was covering a graduation. We used to go out. We did graduations. It's hard to believe now. We used to broadcast beauty pageants, and you're describing what's going on. A lot of it you would have the mic up at the podium, but definitely there were times you had to describe what was happening. So he's describing the graduates making their way down the aisle and talking about and was raw. And he said, and they're coming down the aisle and they have their towels around their neck. And they're looking so regal as they make their way down to receive their diplomas. And there's even a midget graduating tonight, but he's walking just as tall and proud as everybody else.
No.
Now, not politically correct today, but and you're sitting back there at the studio going, how are we going to get out of this one?
No. What do you do?
You just keep running.
You just pretend it never happened.
Pretend it never happened, and you go to the next item on the agenda. But we didn't, nobody said anything, and which the mom and dad of that person who probably didn't have a lot of height, obviously. But, I wasn't there, so I don't know. But that's probably the nicest one. The rest,
they're just not fit, huh?
the rest of them, I might have to shoot you.
Oh man, that's good. That's good. I hadn't heard that one. All right. Well, I want to kind of flip. I'll ask you some rapid fire questions here in just a moment. But I asked you about the favorite things that you get to cover. Are there any things that you just like? I was so happy to not have to do that anymore, not have to cover that necessarily anymore. Is there anything that is kind of your least favorite?
I really can't think of anything right offhand, and I think that goes back to cultivation. There are things if you stay in any job for very long, there are things that you enjoy, and there are things that you'd really rather not have to do. But I realized a long time ago that if I will push through the things that I don't like to do, it actually will make the things I do like to do a whole lot more